Laughter echoed through the grand hall, sharp and cold as a blade cutting into the air. Dylan Crow, the young branch manager newly appointed, stood tall with arms crossed behind a massive walnut desk. His eyes burned with arrogance and satisfaction as every customer turned toward the woman who had just entered. To him, she was no valued guest, but merely an outsider who had stepped into a place too refined for her. Naomi Archer froze for a brief moment, the sound of her heels striking the marble floor, echoing like drum beats, heralding an approaching storm. The lobby fell silent. Some guests leaned in to whisper, while others discreetly raised their phones, ready to capture the entertainment that was about to unfold. Dylan raised his voice, loud enough for each word to pierce the ears of everyone present. "I'm sorry, madam. This is a private banking hall, not a place for people looking to cause trouble. If you don't have an appointment, I must ask you to leave immediately." The air grew thick. His words landed like a public slap. Some customers frowned in discomfort. Others leaned forward with curiosity, waiting to see how the young woman would respond. Naomi did not tremble, did not raise her voice. She calmly set her elegant leather bag on the desk, her deep brown eyes, sharp as steel, locking on Dylan. "I'm here simply to handle standard business procedures. There is no reason for you to turn this into a spectacle." Dylan let out a dry, cutting laugh, the kind that made several employees lower their heads in shame. To him, Naomi's composure was nothing more than a perfect stage for his display of power. "Gabriel," Dylan called toward the veteran guard near the entrance, his tone shrill and commanding, "escort this woman outside. We cannot allow our real clients to be disturbed." Gabriel Ortiz, 45, broad-shouldered and seasoned, hesitated. There was something in Naomi's stance, the steady posture, the confident gaze, that did not resemble a troublemaker at all. But Dylan's sharp glare pressed him forward, forcing him to act. The entire hall held its breath. More phones were raised higher. Live streams began. Online audiences hungry for drama. Naomi didn't step back. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her voice low but resonant enough to carry across the room. "Dylan, you are making a grave mistake. One you'll wish you had never made in just a few minutes." Dylan narrowed his eyes, smirking with disdain. To him, it was nothing more than a hollow threat. "The only mistake here is letting you stand in this hall for too long. I'll repeat myself for the last time. Leave now." Each word dropped heavy, like the toll of a bell signaling disaster. Naomi remained still, her calm presence startling to many onlookers. She even folded her arms lightly, her gaze never leaving Dylan. In that moment, those watching realized this was no fragile woman. She radiated a quiet power, an unshakable composure no arrogance could break. The crowd stirred. A young influencer named Luna Reyes, present by chance, quickly launched a live stream titled "Blatant Racism in Broad Daylight Metropolitan Trust Bank." Views skyrocketed within seconds. Dylan, blinded by ego, stepped from behind the desk, his tall frame looming over Naomi. "If you don't leave, I will call the police. I trust you don't want that kind of trouble, do you?" The room fell still again. Gabriel stepped closer, his eyes filled with hesitation. He muttered softly, almost apologetically, "Forgive me, Mom. I'm only following orders." Naomi gave him a slight nod, her gaze free of blame. "I understand. But today, your real duty is to do what is right." Her words sent a chill through him. The audience murmured louder, many shaking their heads at Dylan's overbearing conduct. Yet Dylan remained oblivious. Naomi drew a sleek black phone from her blazer, its casing engraved with the initials N.A. She tapped a hidden sequence and lifted it to her ear. Her voice rang out clear and sharp as steel. Code 7. Metropolitan Trust Bank. Activate immediately. Several senior employees turned pale at once. Code 7 was an emergency protocol, invoked only in situations involving the highest levels of leadership. Dylan faltered for half a second, then burst into loud laughter to mask his flicker of unease. Code 7, and who exactly do you think you are? I'm not afraid of some meaningless phone call, but Naomi only smiled faintly, a mysterious, knowing smile. She closed the phone, slipped it back into her pocket, and fixed her gaze on Dylan. You'll understand soon enough, and by then, regret will be far too late. The silence that followed was suffocating. In Naomi's quiet, there was a force greater than any outburst. Dylan, still convinced he was in control, had no idea he was digging his own grave. In just minutes, the doors of the grand hall would swing open, footsteps would thunder across the marble, and Dylan Crow would face a brutal truth. The woman he had mocked and humiliated before hundreds of eyes was none other than Naomi Archer, CEO and founder of Metropolitan Trust, the very person holding the fate of the bank in her hands. The great doors of the lobby suddenly swung open, slamming against the wall with a thunderous crack that echoed like lightning in the ears. Everyone turned. A man appeared, striding in haste, his breath heavy as though he had run the entire way. Dark grey suit, tie askew, sweat glistening on his brow. It was Victor Lang, 48, Regional Vice President, a figure every employee of Metropolitan Trust recognized instantly. At the sight of him, staff bowed their heads at once. Victor was known for his calm composure, never once losing control, but today his eyes were wide, his expression frantic, a complete break from his usual poise. He swept past the rows of seats, scanning the room until his gaze landed on Naomi Archer, standing tall in the center of the hall, her face calm, yet veiled in an icy silence. Dear God, Victor gasped, his voice trembling with shock. Naomi. He did not address her formally, but spoke her name with reverence, as though witnessing a disaster. Dylan Crow frowned slightly, masking his unease with a confident smile. He stepped forward, lowering his voice as if reporting to a superior. Mr. Lang, I didn't expect you to come all the way here over something so minor. Just a guest causing a bit of a disturbance. I was handling it. Victor spun on him, his eyes no longer frantic but blazing with cold fury. Minor! His voice cracked like a whip. You have just committed what will be remembered as the greatest mistake of your life. Dylan faltered, his lips trembling, but still tried to defend himself. Sir, I was only following procedure. A customer without an appointment, unable to verify a legitimate transaction, Victor cut him off. He turned toward Naomi, bowing his head low, his voice breaking with shame. Madam CEO Archer, I offer my deepest apologies. I cannot fathom how something like this could happen in the very bank you founded. The lobby erupted in gasps and whispers. Some live streamers nearly dropped their phones. Comment feeds exploded. What? She's the CEO? Did he just humiliate the founder of the bank? This is about to go viral. Dylan froze in horror. He turned to Naomi, his face drained of color. See, CEO? No, that can't be I didn't. Naomi remained unmoved, serene, as though nothing had happened. Her eyes carried no loud anger, only the stillness of true authority. And that silence suffocated Dylan more than any outburst could. Victor drew a long breath, then turned back to Dylan, his tone cutting. You insulted the founder, the chairwoman, and the largest shareholder of Metropolitan Trust. Do you realize you have destroyed your career in mere minutes? Dylan stammered, his words breaking apart. I didn't know, I never if I had known. Naomi's voice sliced in, steady and sharp. The issue is not that you didn't know who I am, Dylan. The issue is that you saw a young black woman in a suit walk in here and decided she didn't deserve respect. You treated me this way not because you didn't know I was the CEO. You treated me this way because you believe status and appearance determine a person's worth. Each word cut like a blade through the air. Customers glared at Dylan with open disgust. Some muttered, "Shameful, he disgraced the entire bank." Gabriel Ortiz quietly stepped back, exhaling in relief. He felt he had narrowly avoided a terrible mistake and was grateful Naomi had given him the chance to choose what was right. Meanwhile, Dylan crumbled, piece by piece. He replayed everything in his mind, the mocking laughter, the dismissive orders, the command to Gabriel, the phone's recording. None of it was just a few words anymore. It had become undeniable evidence broadcast across thousands of live streams. Naomi turned slightly, her eyes shifting to Victor. "We need to get to the boardroom. Right now. I will not allow another minute of delay." Victor nodded, striding toward the elevators. Gabriel and many others bowed deeply as Naomi passed. Each step of her heels struck like a drum of judgment. Dylan stood trapped between the scornful stares of the crowd and the cold reality crushing down on him. He tried to plead, his voice cracking. "CEO Archer, please give me a chance to explain. I can." Naomi did not pause, did not look at him. Her reply was calm, yet glacial. "Explanations cannot erase the truth, Dylan, and the truth has already been exposed." The elevator doors opened, light spilling over Naomi as she stepped in alongside Victor and Mia Duong, her assistant still trembling with the realization that she had stayed silent while injustice unfolded. Dylan staggered after them, his legs heavy as though walking into a courtroom. As the doors closed, the lobby erupted into a storm of whispers. Phones kept recording. Hot headlines spread across social media at lightning speed. But for Dylan, the cameras no longer mattered. What terrified him most was the room at the very top floor, the place where his career would be judged. The elevator doors opened, leading straight to the top floor of Metropolitan Trust. The atmosphere here was entirely different from the chaos below. A long corridor bathed in soft golden light stretched ahead, the glow reflecting against walnut-paneled walls so that each footstep echoed like a drumbeat in Dylan's chest. Naomi Archer walked in front, her posture perfectly straight, every strike of her heels on the polished floor cold and final, like the toll of a funeral bell. Victor Lang moved beside her, his face grave, while Mia Duong, still trembling, followed in silence. At the back trailed Dylan Crow, his head bowed, sweat dampening his spine. Just minutes ago, he had strutted with arrogance, giving orders as if untouchable. Now each step felt like he was being marched to the gallows. The heavy wooden doors of the boardroom slowly swung open, and the atmosphere shifted at once. Dozens of stern eyes from the board of directors turned on them. At the head of the gleaming marble table sat Harold Pierce, 66, chairman of the board. His neatly combed silver hair and penetrating gaze carried such authority that the entire room seemed frozen in place. On the massive LED screen at the far wall, the footage from the lobby played back in sharp detail. Every second, every insult, every gesture of contempt from Dylan unfolded again. The sneer, the order to have Gabriel drag Naomi away, the lined "people like you don't belong here," all reverberated through the room until the silence grew suffocating. Dillon glanced up for the briefest moment before immediately dropping his gaze, as if every stare was slicing through the proud mask he once wore. Naomi did not look at the screen. She sat down beside Harold, composed and regal, commanding the room with nothing more than her presence. The director's eyes followed her, not just because she was the CEO, but because her quiet authority dominated every corner of the chamber. She spoke, her voice steady, each word like a needle piercing the conscience of everyone present. I apologize for convening this emergency meeting, but what happened today inside our own bank is something we cannot and will not tolerate. The air thickened. Harold Pierce nodded slightly, his sharp eyes locking on Dillon. His voice rumbled, low and heavy. Dillon Crowe. Do you understand the consequences of your actions? Dillon swallowed hard, his throat dry. He stammered, Mr. Chairman, I didn't know. I had no idea she was CEO Archer. I thought, Naomi cut in, her voice soft yet edged with steel. That is precisely the problem. You believe respect is only owed once you know someone is the CEO. If I were just another customer, would you still have humiliated me the same way? Is that the culture we are allowing to take root in this bank? The words struck like stone. Not a soul in the room dared to answer. Mia Duong suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling. Miss Archer, I'm sorry. I stood there and did nothing. I was afraid. I thought it was just a small misunderstanding. I was wrong. Naomi turned to her. Her gaze softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. Mia, at least you have the courage to admit your fault. That already puts you ahead of the man sitting beside you. Dillon bowed his head lower, his heart pounding wildly. The images flashing across the screen felt like 1,000 knives cutting into him. His smug expression, his finger pointed at Naomi, his bitter laugh. He wanted to deny it, to shift the blame, but the evidence was undeniable, recorded and spread across countless live streams. Victor Lang's voice broke the silence, heavy with gravity. This is not an isolated mistake. This is a symptom of a systemic illness. If a young manager dares to humiliate the CEO in the middle of the lobby, how many ordinary customers have already suffered the same treatment? The room stirred with unease. Several board members nodded, their faces etched with both anger and shame. Harold Pierce tapped his pen against the marble table, the dry sound cracking like a judge's gavel. Dillon Crowe. Look directly at the truth and answer this. Why did you believe Naomi Archer did not belong in this bank? Dillon trembled, his lips quivering. At last, his words broke out, choked and suffocating. I judged her by her age, by her skin color, by her appearance. I thought she couldn't be someone important. I was completely wrong. The room plunged into a deathly silence. There was no retreat now. Dillon himself had confessed to the prejudice at his core. Naomi's eyes bore into him, not with anger, but with a chilling calm. You have admitted it. And that admission does more than end your career, Dillon. It is a warning to all of us. This bank exists to serve everyone, not to decide who deserves dignity and who does not. A shudder rippled through the boardroom. Every member felt it, the weight of this moment transcending a disciplinary case. This was a turning point that would define the very future of Metropolitan Trust. Naomi's gaze shifted toward Harold, her voice composed yet sharp. It is time we deliver judgment. Dillon lifted his head, his heart plunging into an abyss. He knew that the chair he had boasted of for the past 3 months was about to turn to dust. The atmosphere in the boardroom was so heavy that every breath felt like a burden. Dylan Crow stood there, his hands cold, his eyes unable to meet anyone else's. His earlier confession, that he had judged Naomi Archer for her age, her skin color, and her appearance, still echoed in everyone's minds. It spread like an oil stain, exposing a cultural sickness buried deep within the bank. Harold Pierce, chairman of the board, slowly leaned back in his chair. He set his pen down on the table and tapped it 3 times. The dry sound fell like a gavel in a courtroom. "Dylan Crow," he said, his voice deep and unyielding, "your actions today did not just insult one individual. You have tainted the very core values that Metropolitan Trust was built on from the very beginning. Fairness, respect, and trust." Dylan opened his mouth, but his throat closed up. Every excuse suddenly felt meaningless. Naomi Archer sat upright, her gaze calm, yet piercing. She did not need to shout. She did not need to slam the table. With a single look, Dylan saw clearly. His fate was sealed. Naomi spoke softly, yet her words cut like steel. "The worst part is not that you did not know who I was. The worst part is that you believed a woman like me did not deserve to walk into this lobby. That is not just personal prejudice, Dylan. That is a danger to the entire system." Mia Duong sat nearby, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. She knew she too bore responsibility, for when faced with injustice, she had stayed silent. Yet compared to Dylan, that silence was now a painful lesson rather than a sentence. Victor Lang, the regional vice president, drew in a long breath, then turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have no other choice. If this action is ignored, the trust of our clients will collapse. And more than that, if even our CEO can be humiliated in the lobby of her own bank, then who out there is safe?" Serious nods traveled around the table. Some board members looked at Dylan with disappointment. Others shook their heads and sighed. Harold Pierce turned to Naomi. "CIO Archer, how do you want the board to proceed?" Naomi was silent for a few seconds. The entire room held its breath, her eyes locked on Dylan, showing no hatred, no pity, only the gaze of someone holding the scales of justice. "We cannot allow arrogance and prejudice to destroy what Metropolitan Trust stands for. I recommend the board make an immediate decision regarding Dylan Crow's position." Another pause. Then Harold nodded, his voice firm. "Dylan Crow, the board officially demands your resignation with immediate effect. You no longer hold any position within Metropolitan Trust. This is the inevitable consequence of your actions today." The words fell like the final hammer strike. Dylan staggered, his legs weak. In that instant, he felt as if he were falling into an endless abyss. All his ambitions, all his dreams of a glorious career, shattered in a heartbeat. "No, impossible," Dylan whispered, his eyes red. "I was just getting started. I can make this right." But no one replied. The room was silent, except for his ragged breathing. Naomi rose, her voice ringing clear, calm yet terrifying. "No one rejoices at the collapse of a man. But blind arrogance and prejudice always carry a price. And sometimes that price is an entire career." Dylan lowered his head, then stumbled out of the room, his legs barely carrying him. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, its echo filling the chamber like the final punctuation. Naomi drew a deep breath and turned back to face the board. Her voice was steady and resolute. "But what happened today cannot end with a sentence. This is only the beginning. We need comprehensive reform, or else more men like Dylan will appear. And next time, we may not have the chance to correct it." The room was utterly still. Then slowly, heads nodded in agreement. In their eyes, Naomi was no longer just the victim of an incident. She was the one who had lit the torch of change. Harold Pierce exhaled heavily, his eyes glinting with rare respect. "Then where do you want to begin, Naomi?" Naomi stood tall, her eyes blazing with determination, with a plan, a new protocol, and it will be called the Archer Protocol. The sound of those two words echoed like a vow, marking the dawn of a new era for Metropolitan Trust. The boardroom remained heavy with tension after Dylan Crow's departure. The door had barely closed, its echo sounding like a bell, marking the end of the past and the beginning of a new chapter. Every gaze turned toward Naomi Archer. She rose, her slender frame radiating a strength that held the entire board in silence. Slowly she walked to the head of the table, her eyes sweeping over each member. No murmurs, no doubts remained, only anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice was calm yet commanding. "Today we have witnessed a painful truth. Prejudice and contempt can exist even within a bank built on fairness and trust. If I, the founder, can be treated like an outsider, then what must ordinary clients endure? This was not only Dylan's failure. This is a flaw in the entire system." She paused, letting every word sink in. Then she continued with sharp clarity. "We need reform, not half measures, not gestures to soothe public outrage, but fundamental, irreversible change. I call it the Archer Protocol." A ripple of reaction stirred across the room. The phrase, firm and decisive, pierced directly into everyone's mind. Naomi drew a breath, then gestured to the giant screen behind her. Bold letters appeared. "Archer Protocol 3, Pillars of a New Trust." The first pillar, Naomi declared, her tone unwavering, is mandatory anti-bias training. Every employee, from the lowest level to the highest, including myself, will undergo comprehensive programs to confront and eliminate bias. This will not be a handful of surface-level seminars. It will be deep training, forcing us to face the unconscious judgments we all carry. There will be no evasion, no excuses. We will confront the truth. At the far end of the table, Mia Duong shivered. She knew it would be difficult, but in her heart flickered a fragile hope, a chance to redeem herself. Naomi continued, her eyes bright with determination. "The second pillar is artificial intelligence monitoring. Every conversation, every transaction with clients will be analyzed to detect even the subtlest signs of bias. Technology will act as a silent observer, ensuring no customer is ever dismissed or demeaned simply for being different." A board member frowned, but the cost of such a system will be enormous. Naomi turned sharply, her voice like cold steel. The cost of silence in the face of injustice is far greater. We saw the consequences unfold in minutes in the lobby. If we refuse to change, the price will be the destruction of a century's reputation. No one dared to object further. Naomi pressed on. "The final pillar is monthly diversity audits. Every branch will be reviewed, results transparent and shared internally. No more hiding. No more brushing off small mistakes. Everything will be brought to light and corrected at the root." The silence deepened. Each person understood. The Archer Protocol was not just a promise, it was a warning, a standard by which every employee's future would be measured. Naomi's voice lowered, but every word struck with the weight of stone. From this moment forward, Metropolitan Trust will not only lead in finance, we will lead in justice. No more half measures. No more cover-ups. I want every customer who walks through these doors to know they are respected, not for their status, not for their power, but because they are human. Harold Pierce gave a slow nod, his aged eyes glinting with rare admiration. His voice was deep, steady. "Naomi, this plan is bold. But perhaps this is exactly what we have been waiting for. I and the board will stand behind you." Victor Lang spoke next, his tone solemn. "I have seen too many polished policies that never left the paper, but this time, I believe, because you are not just speaking, you lived it, and you are turning pain into the fire of reform." Naomi inclined her head, her eyes alight with resolve. In that moment, everyone in the room understood. They did not just have a CEO, they had a leader. Applause filled the chamber, not loud or chaotic, but steady and sure, like a pledge. Naomi inhaled and closed with words that left the room silent once more. "Today we dismissed a man for his prejudice. But that cannot be the end. I intend to transform Metropolitan Trust into a place where no one fears being diminished, where no one is ever dismissed. And I will not rest until that vision is reality." In the brightly lit chamber, a new aura began. The Archer Protocol had been born, not merely as a reform plan, but as a vow to change the history of Metropolitan Trust. Just hours after the tense boardroom meeting, Metropolitan Trust had become the epicenter of the city's attention. Live streams from the lobby spread like wildfire, igniting an unprecedented media storm. On the large screen in the bank's press room, headlines flashed non-stop. CEO Naomi Archer humiliated in her own bank. Metropolitan Trust branch manager at the center of racism scandal. The biggest reputation crisis in the bank's history. Victor Lang stood beside Naomi, watching the screen, shaking his head. "The news is spreading faster than we expected, Naomi. National outlets are flooding in. We are out of time." But Naomi showed no panic. She stood by the tall window, gazing at the river of traffic below, her eyes deep and resolute. "We will not hide. We will not stay silent. Right now, Metropolitan Trust must speak the truth, and it must be in my voice." Mia Duong heard those words, her heart trembling, yet filled with admiration. She had once been silent, once afraid, but watching Naomi today, she finally understood the true strength of leadership. The press room overflowed. 2 hours later, the Metropolitan Trust press room was packed wall to wall with reporters. Flashes exploded. Microphones crowded the podium like weapons ready to strike at any misstep. Naomi stepped forward. In contrast to the noise, her steps were slow, her face composed. Her black hair fell neatly behind her shoulders, her navy suit fitted perfectly, her heels tapping with a rhythm as steady as the heartbeat of someone unshaken by the storm. Silence swept the room when she began. "I am Naomi Archer, founder and CEO of Metropolitan Trust. I am not here to make excuses. I am here to face the truth." The opening was short, but its power was undeniable. Every eye locked on her. Naomi's tone dropped, sharp as a blade. "There is one fact we cannot deny. Today, in the very bank I founded, I became the victim of racism. This cannot be justified. It cannot be ignored, and it must never happen again." The silence was so deep that the click of camera shutters was all that could be heard. Naomi continued, her voice resonant, every word striking the room. "But I am not here to dwell on my pain. I am here to speak about solutions. We will turn this moment of shame into a historic turning point. As of today, I am officially launching the Archer Protocol." On the screen behind her, the 3 pillars of reform appeared in bold. Naomi pointed to them, her words hammering into the hearts of those listening. Mandatory training. Every employer, including myself, will undergo in-depth anti-bias training. AI monitoring. An AI system will be implemented to detect and address even the smallest signs of discrimination. Monthly diversity audits. All branches will be strictly reviewed, reports made transparent so that everyone sees we are changing. A reporter raised his hand, his tone sharp. Do you believe this is nothing more than a move to calm public outrage, CEO Archer? Will the Archer Protocol truly change the culture, or is this just a PR stunt? Naomi looked directly into the cameras, a faint smile touching her lips. PR can hide the truth, but only for a moment. I am not here to salvage reputation. I am here to rebuild trust, the trust that was tarnished by our own employees. If we do not change, Metropolitan Trust will collapse, and I will not allow that to happen. The room fell silent, then erupted into shouts, flashes, and a storm of microphones. In the chaos, Naomi stood firm, her eyes shining with an unquenchable light, the light of determination. The domino effect. Within hours, Naomi's speech was everywhere, broadcast on national networks, trending across social media. Hashtags Archer Protocol and No More Bias exploded. Thousands shared her words, not for status, not for power, but because they are human. Employees who had once been silent began posting public support. Customers returned to branches, leaving notes of praise. At last, a leader who takes responsibility. In a dark, small room, Dylan Crow sat frozen before the TV. His face pale, he watched Naomi live on screen. Each word she spoke, each wave of public applause, cut into what remained of his shattered pride. The whole world stands with her. Dylan whispered hoarsely, and I have nothing left. Naomi in the eye of the storm. When the press conference ended, Naomi quietly stepped backstage. Victor Lang and Harold Pierce approached. Victor placed a hand on her shoulder. Naomi, you just turned a crisis into a powerful vow. From this moment, the entire financial sector will look at Metropolitan Trust differently. Naomi did not smile. Her gaze was distant, thoughtful. This is only the beginning. Change doesn't come in a day. But today, at least we planted a seed. The media storm outside had not yet subsided when inside Metropolitan Trust, Naomi Archer began clearing away the remaining fragments. She knew that for the Archer Protocol to be more than an empty slogan, it had to be instilled into every person and every action. And the first person Naomi thought of was Mia Duong, the young assistant who had remained silent as Dylan Crow humiliated her in the lobby. A private meeting. One afternoon, when the office was nearly empty, Naomi invited Mia into her office. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock. Naomi sat behind the large wooden desk, her hands clasped, her gaze calm yet piercing. Mia, she began, her voice low and steady. You know why I wanted to see you, don't you? Mia lowered her head, her hands clenched so tightly they trembled. Her voice was hoarse. I know. I saw everything. I heard Dylan insult you. And I did nothing. I was too afraid. I stayed silent. Naomi did not interrupt. She let every shaky word spill out, forcing Mia to confront the weight of her silence. At last, Naomi nodded slightly. Yes. Your silence that day disappointed me even more than Dylan's shouting. But Naomi paused, her tone softening. I do not want you to leave. I believe people can change. I want to give you a chance. Mia's eyes widened in disbelief. A chance? Naomi rose, walked around the desk and stood before her. Yes. A chance to turn a mistake into a voice. a chance to become living proof that the Archer Protocol is not just theory. It begins with those who once faltered. The difficult road. The very next day, Naomi signed the order. Mia Duong would be the first employee to undergo the intensive anti-bias training program. But she would not only learn, she would also become the pioneer, sharing her experience across the entire organization. Mia entered the program with a heavy heart. The early days were grueling. Lectures on unconscious bias, simulations of discriminatory situations, real-life footage that cut deep. But the hardest part came during direct meetings with people who had suffered from discrimination. A middle-aged woman recounted being denied a loan because of her appearance. A young man trembled as he shared how hotel security once threw him out, assuming he could not afford to stay. Each story pierced Mia like a blade. She realized that her silence that day, if not toward Naomi, could just as easily have been toward any customer, and that meant her silence had enabled injustice. At night, staring at her reflection, Mia broke down in tears. Yet through the tears, a new flame began to rise. She would never stay silent again. The first time speaking up. 1 month later, Naomi convened an internal meeting with hundreds of employees. As the room buzzed with talk about the future of the Archer Protocol, Naomi suddenly called out, "Mia, I want you to share your story." The room fell silent. Mia rose, her legs trembling. But when she met Naomi's calm, trusting gaze, she drew a deep breath and began. "I am Mia Duong. On the day Dylan Crow insulted CEO Archer in the lobby, I was there. I heard it, I saw it, and I said nothing. I thought silence would keep me safe. But in truth, that silence made me part of the wrong." Her voice wavered at first, then grew firm. The training opened my eyes. I met people who have suffered deeply, judged only by their appearance. And I understood. If we do not speak out, injustice will continue. I promise from this day on I will never stand still in the face of injustice. And I hope none of us will either. The hall erupted in applause, not for grand words, but for truth. Naomi smiled softly. She knew the first seed of the Archer Protocol had taken root. Naomi faith in change. After the meeting, Naomi approached Mia again. She placed a hand on her shoulder, her eyes gentler than ever. "You did well. Your story will become the spark that fuels change in this place." Tears welled in Mia's eyes. "Miss Archer, thank you for not giving up on me. I promise I will be worthy of your trust." Naomi smiled, though inside she carried a deeper thought. If someone who had once been silent could stand and change, then the entire system could too. A new beginning. From that moment, Mia became the living testament of the Archer Protocol. At every branch, at every workshop, she was invited to share her story. Colleagues who had once seen reform as a burden began to see in her a mirror, and they started to believe change was real. Naomi watched it unfold, her heart filled with resolve. But she also knew the true test was only beginning. Because outside, the media storm had not calmed, and the world was waiting to see whether Metropolitan Trust would truly keep its promise or shatter under the pressure. 1 month after the historic press conference, Metropolitan Trust was no longer just a name tied to financial prestige. It had become the centerpiece of social, political, and even entertainment talk shows, all revolving around a single question. Is the Archer Protocol real change or just a PR stunt? Naomi Archer knew such doubt was inevitable. That was why she decided to take a bold step, releasing the results of the first diversity audit, fully transparent, before employees and the press. tension before the announcement. In the grand hall, hundreds of employees and reporters crowded together, the atmosphere dense like the moment before a storm. Victor Lang stood at the back of the stage, leaning toward Naomi and whispering, "Naomi, if the numbers are too bad, the press will tear us apart." Naomi turned back, her gaze steady. "We don't run from the truth. The worse it is, the more we must show we are willing to face it." In one corner, Mia Duong clutched a stack of reports tightly, her heart pounding as she recalled the grueling training. Today, these very reports would prove whether the Archer Protocol was just theory or if it had truly taken root. Truth brought to light, Naomi stepped up to the podium, her face calm under the relentless flashes. The giant screen behind her lit up, revealing stark figures. 12% of transactions in the past month flagged by AI for signs of bias. 8 branches marked as needing urgent improvement. Customer complaints related to discriminatory behavior reduced by 40% in just 4 weeks. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Some reporters quickly typed headlines, "Bank admits to 12% internal bias." But Naomi did not allow them to frame the story. "Yes," she declared, her voice strong. 12% is a number that shames us, but instead of hiding it, we bring it into the light, because only the truth can save us, and a 40% reduction in complaints. That is just the beginning. Every branch, every individual, will continue to be monitored and improved. Her words sliced through the air like a blade. Even the most skeptical reporters faltered in the face of such transparency. The ripple effect. That evening, major networks ran the story. Naomi Archer reveals internal failures, a reckless gamble or a true revolution. Metropolitan Trust faces the truth. Is the Archer Protocol working? On social media, the hashtag #FaceTheTruth exploded. Thousands shared the image of Naomi standing before the screen of numbers, her eyes unflinching, captioned, "This is what leadership looks like." Within the bank, the spirit of change grew stronger. Gabriel Ortiz, the security guard who had once hesitated under Dylan's command, was now a model student in the training program. He often stood before colleagues to confess, "That day, I stayed silent because I feared losing my job. But I realized silence only fuels the wrong. I will never make that mistake again." His words spread, inspiring others to confront the prejudice within themselves. Pressure from the industry. But not everyone welcomed the change. Rival banks mocked in the media. Metropolitan Trust is exposing its own weaknesses. Can clients still trust them with their assets? Major investors called in with sharp questions. "Naomi, these reforms will cost millions. Are you certain you're not leading us into a financial sinkhole?" Naomi answered bluntly, without hesitation. "The cost of not changing is far greater. If we lose trust, we lose everything." Victor Lang, known for his caution, could only nod. He admitted Naomi was no longer just leading a bank. She was redefining the entire industry. An image etched in memory. When the announcement ended, one photo spread like wildfire. Naomi standing before the massive screen, the numbers behind her exposing both failure and progress, her face unflinching. The most shared caption read, "True strength is not in hiding flaws, but in facing them head-on." Naomi stepped out of the hall, the evening wind brushing through her hair, her gaze distant yet unwavering. She knew storms still lay ahead, scrutiny would persist, and the industry would watch her every move. But within her, a conviction had crystallized. The Archer Protocol had stepped into reality, and nothing could stop it now. 3 months after the release of the first audit, Metropolitan Trust was no longer remembered as the center of a scandal. Instead, its name had become tied to a new concept, the Archer Protocol, a symbol of bold reform and transparency in the financial industry. The first results' monthly reports began to reflect undeniable change. Complaints tied to discriminatory behavior dropped by 72% compared to before. 15 branches, once listed as in urgent need of improvement, passed their second audits, and internal surveys revealed that 89% of employees felt the workplace was now fairer and safer to speak up. Naomi Archer read those numbers from her bright office on the top floor. But for her, what mattered most were not the percentages, but the real faces behind the change. Mia Duong had now become an internal trainer, leading workshops on unconscious bias. She not only recounted the silence of that day, but also shared the painful journey she endured to change herself. Each time Mia stood before her colleagues, her eyes lit up and her voice rang clear. Never think silence keeps you safe. Silence is the knife that stabs justice in the back. Gabriel Ortiz, the security guard who had once hesitated, was now appointed head of security training. In every session, he told his story, his deep voice resonating, his calloused hands gripping the microphone. I once stood still in the face of injustice. But today, I swear to you, we are not only here to protect assets, we are here to protect human dignity. His words, sincere and raw, carried more weight than any presentation slide. The financial industry takes notice. As results became visible, other banks could no longer dismiss the change. At first they mocked, calling the Archer Protocol an expensive stunt. But when they saw customers flocking to Metropolitan Trust, when they read the media's praise for transparency, they were forced to change their tone. 17 major domestic banks sent invitations for Naomi to speak. Financial associations began listing the Archer Protocol as a case study. Even top universities reached out, eager to incorporate the model into their curricula. In one executive meeting, Victor Lang looked at Naomi and said, half joking, half serious, "Naomi, you didn't just save Metropolitan Trust. You are rewriting the rules of the industry." Naomi smiled, her gaze steady. "No, Victor, I am not rewriting the rules. I am simply reminding them of something simple. People must be respected." A national moment. Naomi's name spread beyond banking. One Monday morning, she received an invitation from the Congressional Finance Committee, asking her to present before lawmakers as a model of reform. That day, the chamber was packed. Politicians, financial experts, and journalists filled every seat. Naomi stepped up to the podium without fear. She began with her own story, then guided them through numbers and real faces that had changed. She ended with a declaration: "The Archer Protocol is not just a policy. It is proof that we can turn pain into reform, turn silence into action. And if one bank can do it, then an entire nation can do it." The chamber erupted as the audience rose to their feet, applause thundering like a storm. Dylan, a shadow, left behind. Meanwhile, in a shabby apartment on the outskirts of the city, Dylan Crow sat before his TV, following Naomi's every step. His face was gaunt, his eyes filled with bitterness and regret. Every round of applause in Congress was another blade twisting into the memory of his downfall, a downfall of his own making. The whole nation honors her. "And I've become nothing more than a cautionary tale," Dylan muttered, his hand trembling as he clutched a glass of cheap liquor. Madame torch, burning bright, returning from Congress, Naomi stood silently on the rooftop of headquarters, gazing out over the city. Night had fallen, and the lights stretched beneath her like a galaxy. Victor approached softly. "Naomi, are you tired? You haven't rested once in 3 months." Naomi shook her head gently. In her eyes burned a brilliant flame. "There is still so much to do, Victor. The Archer Protocol has only just begun. We are far from the finish line. But I believe we are on the right path." 1 year after Naomi Archer announced the Archer Protocol, Metropolitan Trust had transformed completely. Numbers that were once only aspirations had become historic achievements. Customer satisfaction had risen from 63% to 88%. The highest in the industry, complaints tied to bias had nearly disappeared with a reduction of more than 95%, and net revenue had grown 18% in a single year, far surpassing the bleak forecasts made when the crisis first erupted. But to Naomi, the numbers were only the surface. What mattered most were the real stories, the people who had changed. A different bank. In the Great Hall marking 1 year of the Archer Protocol, thousands of employees gathered. On stage, Naomi stood alongside Mia Duong and Gabriel Ortiz. Both had become the emblematic faces of reform. Mia spoke, her voice steady, her eyes shining. "I was once the silent one, but the Archer Protocol gave me the courage to stand. Now I want to say to all my colleagues, do not be afraid when you see injustice. Speaking up is not a choice, it is a duty." Applause roared through the hall. Gabriel followed, his deep voice warm. "I once thought my job was only to protect assets. But no, we must protect the dignity of every customer. That is the true responsibility." Naomi looked at them quietly, the corners of her lips lifting. They, the living witnesses, were proof that change could begin with those who once seemed weakest. Impact on the entire industry. On the giant screen, a map of the United States appeared, dozens of banks highlighted in green, symbols of those that had adopted the Archer Protocol or their own versions of it. The Congressional Finance Committee declared Metropolitan Trust the national standard for transparency and equality in banking. Invitations poured in from top universities. The Archer Protocol was included in management curricula as a prime example of reform born from crisis. Students were taught that one courageous decision could transform an entire corporate culture. Dylan, a circle of redemption. Elsewhere, Dylan Crow stood at a small seminar in a university. No longer in a tailored suit, he wore a simple shirt. Before a few dozen students, he confessed, "I lost everything because of my bias. I once believed power was in putting others down. But now I understand. True power lies in respecting them. I stand here not to excuse myself, but to tell you, do not repeat my mistakes." Applause followed. Dylan knew he could never reclaim the past, but at least he could use his painful lesson to warn the next generation. Naomi's legacy. Back at the Metropolitan Trust Hall, Naomi stepped to the center of the stage. The room fell silent. She looked out over the thousands of employees, over the changed faces, and spoke. 1 year ago, we faced the worst crisis in our history. But instead of hiding, we turned it into a fire for reform. The Archer Protocol did not just save this bank, it laid the foundation for a new culture, a culture of fairness, transparency, and dignity. She paused, drew a deep breath, her voice rising with strength. Today, I do not want us only to be proud of what we have changed. I want us to commit to keeping this fire burning forever, so that anyone who walks through these doors, no matter who they are, is treated with absolute respect. The applause thundered, and did not end. Naomi smiled softly. In that moment, she knew her legacy was not profit margins, nor just internal reform. Her true legacy was a generation of employees who dared to stand, an industry brave enough to change, and a society beginning to believe that justice is not only theory. The final image. When the ceremony ended, Naomi quietly stepped onto the balcony, gazing over the city glowing with lights. The sound of applause still echoed behind her. The night wind swept through her hair. In Naomi's eyes burned an unshakable belief. The fight against injustice would never end. But from this day forward, Metropolitan Trust had become a torch, and she, Naomi Archer, had left an indelible mark on every heart. The story closes not only with the downfall of one man, but with the rise of an entire system. Naomi Archer proved that sometimes a single moment of confronting injustice, a single decision to step forward, can transform a tragedy into a historic turning point. Today, Metropolitan Trust is no longer just a bank. It has become a symbol that respect and fairness are not privileges, but inherent rights of every human being. Yet the question that remains is not only for Naomi, for her employees, or for Dylan, who fell and then learned the path of redemption. That question is for all of us. If one day you witness injustice, will you choose silence, or will you stand up? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and spread this video so that more people understand. Justice is not a slogan. It begins with every small action, every courageous voice, from you, from me, from all of us.